Good evening. How's everyone doing? I am your Mayor Pro Tem, Corey Branch, representing Raleigh District C, and I'm honored to welcome you all tonight as an ongoing conversation with residents, experts, and staff to talk about how Raleigh can grow strategically and innovatively on a series of topics so that the city is better for everyone. Tonight's topic is a very tough topic. It's a topic that we have to address. It's a national issue, it's a county issue, and it's a Raleigh issue, and it's known as gentrification. And today we have some very special people here to talk about it. But before I get started, I do want to recognize Mr. Russ Stevenson at City Council at Large, who's present, Ms. Nicole Stewart, City Council at Large, and Mr. David Cox as well, who is present. Did I miss any other counselors? Those are the ones I saw. Okay. And Steph Mandel, thank you. Steph Mandel, who's present as well. Thank you all, and that shows you that as a council, we're ready and we're prepared to work with you hand in hand as we address all the challenges in the city. And please excuse that little one. I know that voice well. That's my little girl. But I do want everyone to know that also our Mayor, Nancy McFarland, wanted to be here as well, but she is still out. She is still recovering from back surgery, but she is definitely sends her best wishes and her thoughts with us as we move forward. If you look up gentrification in the dictionary or on Wikipedia, there's really no clear definition. Many of the explanations talk about derotating the destruction of urban neighborhoods, elimination of blight, and raising the bar. Some go as far to state gentrification as a common and controversial topic in politics and urban planning. Well, when I look at gentrification, it is complicated. The question is, why are people moving? Why are homes being sold? Why are people moving in communities? Are they being pushed out? Are they just selling? Is it air property? Is it taxes, tax related? What is the real reason that we see the change? Is it economic? Tonight, we will have that conversation together. As you all were coming in the lobby, there was a number of tables, and you were greeted. I pray you were greeted. If not, I greet you, and thank you for coming in here tonight. But there's things where we talk about equitability development around our transit. And when we look at our new transit system, BRT, the question is, how are we going to implement it? How is it going to grow? We have to do it together. We have to make sure that those that move to Raleigh have opportunity, but we have to make sure that those that grew up here have opportunity to participate and to grow. That's the only way we can do it. We have our homeowners rehab and home buyers association programs with the city, with our housing and neighborhood development departments. So some of that information is out front, so please visit the tables, talk to them, learn about programs that you didn't know the city may have. But tonight, I'm ready for this panel. We have a great panel. We have those on the panel that grew up here. We have those that move here, but they're all Raleigh, and we're all Raleigh. So as they come up, I would like to introduce Ms. Kia Baker, Executive Director of Southeast Raleigh Promise, Mr. Asa Fleming, President of North Carolina Association of Realtors and Realtors with the Tate Realtors, Ms. Yvette Holmes, Vice President of Resource Development and Partnership with DHIC. We have Mr. Paul Kane, Executive Vice President, CEO, Home Builders Association of Raleigh-Wake, and Pamela Wideman, Housing and Neighborhood Services Director, Charlotte, North Carolina. But before then, we have a great speaker, a speaker that she's a North Carolina girl. She's North Carolina State alum. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Black Urbanist multimedia platform and author of the Black Urbanist, second edition forthcoming. Creator of public speaking courses, Plan to Speak, and one half of the podcast, Third Wave Urbanism, as well as a freelance writer, urban planner, and advocate. So she knows Raleigh. She holds a Master's of Public Affairs focused on community and economic development from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Ms. Jeffers, please come on up, and we look forward to hearing from you and the entire panel.
Well, good evening, Raleigh. It has honestly been about 10, 11 years since I've been on this end of town. I'm going to go ahead and advance this so you can see my lovely face as you've seen on the event invitation. So tonight, what they've asked me to do before we get into our panel is they wanted me to give a sense, sort of the occasion of why we're here, talk a little bit about gentrification, a little bit about what it is, but of course, if you've known me and known my work tends to be very personal, and is for you all what we're all going through here in Raleigh, Wake County, the region. As Mayor Pro Tem mentioned before, I am a Wolfpacker. I'm a Wolfpack girl. I am a North Carolinian through and through, born and raised in Greensboro, but I spent the 3.5 years in Raleigh and a year in Durham here, back and forth, family all over, and this is a story that I'm going to tell you tonight, in addition to talking about the elements of gentrification that comes also from years of working and living in North Carolina, but also living and working kind of out and about. I make my home just outside of D.C. now, and that'll be a spoiler alert. Let me go ahead and talk to you about what it is. So, as was mentioned before, there are a lot of things that I'm going to step away. I think everybody can still hear me. So there are a lot of things that we've seen as far as gentrification comes. When I think about the definition that I use, this is what I start with. Basically, it started in the academy. This is something, and I'm going to put up a quote here in just a moment of the person who used that term for the very first time in the year she did it. But effectively, it is when we talk about neighborhoods and people in neighborhoods that we consider economically poor, or sometimes even just culturally poor, or for some reason or another. And then how those neighborhoods become more economically rich, or the folks that we assume to be more economically rich come in. It is an easy word to pronounce. You know, there are a lot of other sort of academic words that people use for certain things, but they never make it outside of the academy. But it is one word. It is one word that has been able to come in and symbolize a lot of things. And I do think that's why we hear it in the media a lot. I have been doing a lot of press for this event, and people have been asking about various portions, things that academics may not consider as part of it, things that you may not consider as part of it, but collectively, all the things that we've been dealing with, everything from the effects of economic development to the effects of lack of transit to just everything that's coming under this umbrella here. That is what I see happening with gentrification and the terminology. This is a quote from Ruth Glass. Ruth Glass was the first person, she coined this term in 1964. She is a British professor, studies economic movements. It is considered an economic, it is considered a class element. That's partly why there's so many layers to it and so many layers as to how it applies. But as we all know, a lot of things, especially here, we are Southerners, we are Raleigheites, we do know that oftentimes a lot of what we deal with, there is the legacy of how people were seen, especially the black and white bodies that were here in the era when we were building Raleigh. So a lot of our definition, rightfully so, is going to be colored by the legacy of Jim Crow and segregation and social practices, separate but equal, all those things. And so I wanted to show you, you've seen some of these maps, you've seen them in reports. This is the official name of the redlining maps, the security maps by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. This was a New Deal program, and of course, as many of you know, the New Deal was the series of things that President Roosevelt did to kind of help us out of the Great Depression. As some of us also know, some of those New Deal programs didn't exactly help everyone equally, and this was the case. I was not able to find Raleigh's colored map, but also I want to note the book, The Color of Law, is a good primer if you want to read that to learn more about how these maps have affect our housing market, have affected who has air property, where people could buy. And yes, there are similar maps to that today. I'm going to show you something that's similar but isn't quite used in the same way. So effectively, this is in Durham. This is what Durham looked like. So the green is considered the best. The red is considered, actually it says hazardous here. Now, if you know Durham's demographics, as many of you do, we are sister cities here, and basically a lot of these areas, and this isn't the whole city, this was just Durham as it was built out in the era of the Depression, the 30s and 40s. So effectively, those red areas were those that were predominantly Black Americans and others. And so even today, you do see this. I can absolutely vouch for what Greensboro looks like. Again, this is my hometown, and I can tell you that this isn't the entire city. The center city is not even marked. And you'll find that on some of these maps. Even though we're talking about issues here in the center city, we're talking about areas in the center city that are weighted a certain way, that the housing values are a certain way. This is effectively how it was seen. And so when you hear the term redlining, it comes from the red boxes. It comes from the fact that those red neighborhoods in different cities across the nation were areas where Black homeowners were given the ability to inherit to purchase property and potentially hand down property. Let me clarify that. Then I wanted to put up the Racial Dot Project. Some of you have seen this. This is, if you Google this is something the University of Virginia has done. You can actually look up this online. It is interactive. You can actually zoom in anywhere in the country and you can see where different people are. This is what this looks like without the coloring in it. Each dot is a person, and it is based on the 2010 numbers. Of course, next year we're about to go through another census process. Of course, we've just heard some news about things that are going to be included in the next census. Many of you also who get the surveys, the Census Bureau occasionally surveys people. I know when I still lived in Durham, my year after undergrad, I got the American Community Survey. So this isn't quite as updated population numbers, but it still gives you a good idea over the last 10 years where people have lived especially in Raleigh. I've zoomed into Raleigh, I've zoomed into the belt, inside the Beltline. So what they've done, people are color-coded here, but they're not color-coded based on kind of what they would look like, but it does, and it doesn't actually correspond to those other maps I showed you, but there is some color coding involved. But the idea here is just to show where people are and how people mix and mingle. If you go to the site and zoom in on the maps, you can really see street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, approximately where people are and who's living where. And by this color table here, blue, white is blue, black is green, red is Asian, orange is Hispanic, and then other race, multiracial Native American. And these are census classifications. I do want to honor the fact that for a lot of people, especially with the Hispanic category, that is an overlay. I do want to acknowledge that, and they acknowledge that in this study, but ultimately they elected to use the census and what people check in the boxes, or what they check first in the boxes to do this. And I'm going to zoom in here. This is what that map looks like inside the Beltway and a little bit outside. So effectively, where the quote-unquote hot spot, as it were, where we've been focusing a lot of the media attention on gentrification here in Raleigh is in Central Raleigh. Even though we've been looking at Southeast Raleigh a lot lately, many of us that know and who have been here for a while, again, I arrived in the fall of 2004 as a resident. I lived on campus, and even back then there were rumbles of houses being torn down and built up again. There were neighborhoods that were hot, neighborhoods that people were talking about over the 4 or so years that I lived in the Triangle area here in Raleigh, as well as other neighborhoods, other towns, collectively that make up this Triangle region. And so I wanted to zoom in on this, but again, definitely take a look at this. I think this is just interesting to just see where we are actually living, and like I said, thinking about this in maps and thinking about some of the things that spatially show where we are living. This, again, I want to be clear, this does not show where gentrification is per se. What I hope to do tonight is when I bring my panelists up here, I hope to have conversations about various elements of how we're working through the challenges of the changes in things like property taxes and home ownership and things of that nature. But I will go ahead and talk about how gentrification has affected me. Because it's more than just, as we all know, it's more than just the number on the page. It's more than the number on the property tax statement. It's more than the number of your house value. It's also sometimes cultural. It's also sometimes what you can do. And so I am a proud member of the millennial generation, as you probably picked up with the year date I just gave you when I started undergrad. And being a part of the millennial generation means there's been a lot of challenges specifically to my generation that I have faced. Now, many people will say just hold out, things will shake out, all that. But as we all know, when it comes time to think about home purchases or home maintenance, or even where we're commuting, where we're taking jobs, if we're having children, how we're having children, who we're partnered with, these all do have factors in how we see ourselves and we see our neighborhoods and we see our neighbors. So these things, I believe, do come into play. And so I'm just gonna share a few of them before I bring up some of the panelists this evening. So I graduated in December of 2007. I thought I had jumped the gun. I was on partial scholarship most of the time I was there, and I started to nerd out over the numbers of my tuition and fees and such. And I said, okay, well, I'm done with my program. Why don't I go ahead and just graduate early? But I graduated early. If you look into my work and into places I've worked here in North Carolina, you'll note that I've worked for certain organizations. I'm not gonna embarrass those organizations tonight, but I will say that some of those environments were not positive. They did not create a conducive environment, and they did not pay well. So being able to save money, even in our fairly low cost of living state, was not happening. So that's one factor that affected me. Then I didn't want to just sit there and take that. I wanted to take initiative. Again, the thing about being a Wolfpacker in the aughts, we were very pushed to be innovative, look at things, use the resources we have, do things. Think and do was not quite our motto back then, but it definitely was imbued in our campus, and so that's what I did. So as many people who, if you're involved in the tech industry, if you're involved in the startup industry here in this area, of course, it's a major economic driver. A lot of the things we're doing out in RTP and beyond. So I bootstrapped, and what we basically call, you spend your own money to do your own stuff. So changed jobs. And then in addition to changing jobs and building this business, the Black Urbanist platform, as well as other things, I also changed jurisdictions. I moved out of state. I moved to get different jobs. I moved to get different experiences. And so with that, and with me taking those kinds of entrepreneurial risks, I had the kind of finances that an entrepreneur has before they quite get successful. Because of that, unfortunately, I was in New York at a conference. I got a call that I'll never forget. It was a call to tell me that my father had passed away in his home. And unfortunately, I was not able to inherit that home because he himself had his own struggles. I won't put those struggles out there. He was a wonderful man. I miss him dearly. He taught me a lot about what it meant to be a neighbor, what it meant to be a homeowner, what it meant to be, a person in the world. And so, we talked about purchasing homes and, not necessarily, I wouldn't call it flipping, but just purchasing homes for community members, purchasing my own home, creating my own wealth, doing all those things together. And so losing him was a shift and an adjustment. Now, I will note here that I still have my mom. She's still very much with me. They themselves were not able, I'm an only, they weren't able to make it work as a couple, but they both were very much involved in my life, spending lots of times driving back and forth from Greensboro to Raleigh for various things on campus and such, moving me in and out of dorms, those kinds of things. And Dad always wanted me to kind of look into property records and everything, and I had wanted to be able to take on at least his house, but of course, with it being so sudden, and with his challenges, that was not available to me. And so I think a lot of advantages, there's a lot of people in this room who understand the challenges of having air property and taking care of air property, and sometimes if the property taxes are going up on the air property. Those of you who have family members who are a little bit further spread out, both of my parents grew up in what we would consider rural, at least back then. My mom grew up in Alamance County. My dad grew up in what was a rural part of Guilford. It is now very much incorporated into Guilford County. In fact, I've gotten, inquiries about different pieces of other family lands. And again, there's the challenge of our regions are growing on farmland, and being able to inherit that, being able to take on that responsibility. And that is a huge responsibility. It is not easy to be a homeowner, to maintain your own primary residence, much less maintaining heir properties or extra properties. So anyone who is engaged in that, this is where a lot of times I think the gentrification conversation comes into play here in North Carolina. My own struggles with mental health, I think is very important, and we are talking more about getting the help you need with mental health. Also, realizing the truth about, who I love. I am honored to have my partner Les with me here tonight. She has brought so much light into my life, and I cannot express that enough. But of course, we have, there's differences there. There's the challenges of that, and those two things, knowing who I am, being someone who travels around. And then, with all these different pieces of my life coming together, as of right now, I can't, as of right now, and this may be different. I know my panelists tonight may be able to tell me something different. I hope they will be able to tell me something different about being able to afford a home, but I do love living downtown. I was thrilled at how close downtown was when I was on campus here in Raleigh. This was before Wolfline came downtown on a regular basis. I also did not own a car when I was in college. And I also just ended a period of not owning a car as an adult. I definitely think car-free life is life is possible, but that is something we have to consider here, especially in this region. In order to secure a home, oftentimes we cannot afford that in the center cities. For years, as many of you know, and as we've talked about over and over again, affording a lot of the center city property was more affordable for folks, but now we are seeing a reverse in that. And even as we add different little town centers, places where you can walk to everything, your North Hills is, your I guess Pryor Creek even technically counts as that, even though it's a little bit more spread out. But there are things in really close proximity to where homes are. Schools are walkable, all those things. And of course, the challenges we have as here in Raleigh, you assume the new transit plans that have gone out there, and even working with Orange County, the changes in that particular plan. So I noticed that, as of right now, the dream house that I have is not in reach. I like to call myself an urbanist, and just basically, I believe it's someone who values cities, who values the coming together. There will some that'll say, oh, you can't be an urbanist with a car. I don't believe that. Oh, you're Southern and you grew up in sprawl and you don't know what that means, and you grew up adjacent to farms. I think that's also exclusive. Basically, I believe it means someone who is concerned about the well-being of cities, about the well-being of everyone in cities, and how we can work together to make all those things better in cities. So, as I mentioned before, this is a platform, the multimedia platform. I podcast, I'll be rebooting soon. I've written a book, I've written blog posts. I started that while I was doing my master's studies. I noticed my textbooks had a few missing things. There was plenty of talk about how African-American families in some cities were forced to move into housing projects or offered that opportunity, and how in some cases that backfired on them. I didn't see my family's experience. I didn't see an experience that a lot of us North Carolinians, Raleighans can relate to, of having heir property, of having a tie to rural life. And so that's in addition to what I mentioned before with my dad. And now I'm even more compelled as someone of many marginalized groups to be out here speaking out about issues like gentrification, building better transit, building a better quality of life, our park systems, our water quality, all the things that make not just our quote unquote cities, but just our state, everywhere in the state, work well. And so at the moment, I can't afford a home of my own, and for the longest time, I told myself I was a failure. How could I be this person on these kinds of stages, having these conversations and having this elephant in the room? But the reality is we all have an elephant in the room like this, and that's why I believe this topic hits us all so closely together. I'm about to bring up the panel. But before I do that, I want to show you some numbers that I calculated, some actual numbers from my experience dealing with the actual cost of living and some form of gentrification. So when I moved off campus, I moved into South Durham. I lived right off of 5455. I commuted. At first, I commuted to an office just around the corner in Research Triangle Park. But then I got an internship, and I was driving from 5455 over to North Hills. This was in 2008 when this happened, and there was a situation off the coast. Sometimes, we have those hurricanes come in. Next thing you know, our gas prices are spiking in crazy ways. That happened to me. That kind of shook me back into, as an adult, thinking about green life and green living. Going through and thinking about the apartment I lived in when I had that epiphany of paying $730 a month for what accounted to be a luxury unit, going to do research for this talk and looking at it being $1,200 a month and seeing that 70% increase. As much as and I've said this in some of the promotional material for tonight, as much as this is a hard conversation for me, and as much as I don't have perfect answers or perfect ways of saying things, this number really stuck out. And I never thought I would see this kind of increase in this region. I expected in DC where I live now. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, we're kind of a hotbed. And if you've read, those of you who read reports about gentrification, there's been some reports released out about how the rate in DC is one of the highest in the country. Thankfully, I don't believe we're quite there in Raleigh yet, and that's, again, why it's important that we're here tonight having a conversation that's going to be predicated, I hope, and I do hope you all will take action, be inspired by what we talk about tonight. And then one other thing is, again, I got to leave this on a Wolfpack note. My degree would cost 2 times more if I did it now. And some of you who actually have looked at the timetable probably will note that it's my degree from 04 to 07 is probably twice, if not 3 times as much as some of you paid, those of you who are Wolfpackers who went, say, in the 70s or 80s. We are definitely past the point where people can work minimum wage jobs, work part-time, work jobs, and pay their way through things like college, or even pay their way through a major health emergency. And yes, again, those things do affect what we are dealing with here. So I am excited about getting some folks here that have been dealing with this longer than me, people who are seasoned, people who have been on the ground here in Raleigh working through these issues. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce my panelists again even more. I'm going to bring them up, and then I'm going to ask some questions I prepared for them, but then I'm also going to ask some questions that you all have written for me out on the wall here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody up. My first person I'm going to bring up is Kia Baker. She is a Southeast Raleigh native, currently serves as the executive director for Southeast Raleigh Promise, Inc. Southeast Raleigh Promise is an initiative to advance community change through collective impact. The organization knows that Southeast Raleigh is rich in culture, diversity, and promise, and that there's no part of the city with more potential to grow and add vitality to our region than Southeast Raleigh. After graduating from Hampton University in Virginia, Kia returned to the Triangle, began working as a community organizer in Hillsborough, where her passion to work for social change began to grow. She has over a decade of experience with nonprofit organizations including Habitat for Humanity, Public Allies, and most recently as the chief of food recovery and distribution at a Feeding America food bank, the Interfaith Food Shuttle. Kia currently serves on the boards of Carolina Common Enterprise, Fertile Ground Food Cooperative, the Southeast Raleigh Assembly, and the New Bern Avenue Corridor Alliance. In her spare time, Kia enjoys gardening and creating culinary masterpieces for her family. So let's welcome Kia. Asa Fleming is a realtor with Tate Realtors here in Raleigh and the president of the North Carolina Association of Realtors. He is also a past president of the Raleigh Regional Association of Realtors. Asa began his real estate career 20 years ago in New York. Asa is a graduate of North Carolina State University, and he just received his master's degree from Realtor University. Asa is also a graduate of the National Association of Realtors Leadership Academy and Leadership North Carolina. He served as a member of the City of Raleigh Appearance Commission for 6 years and now serves as a member of the Wake County Planning Board. Asa's community involvement includes service to the boards of Marbles Kids Museum, the Carrion Place Inc., Southeast Raleigh Promise, and Rebuilding Together of the Triangle. He is also one of the founding board members of Central Wake High School Charter School in Raleigh, where he serves as the treasurer. Asa and his wife Tangi live here in Raleigh with their 2 children. Asa enjoys helping families with their real estate needs, giving back to the industry that puts food on his table and the community where he lives. Yvette Holmes is the Vice President of Resource Development and Partnerships at DHIC, an organization here in Raleigh that since 1974 has demonstrated the importance of connecting people with safe, affordable, and desirable homes. DHIC provides home buyer support and develops rental communities for families and individuals with limited incomes. Yvette has been with DHIC since 2012 and has over 25 years of nonprofit management, fundraising, marketing, and information technology experience. Yvette is responsible for DHIC's community relations and public-facing programs, as well as cultivating new and existing partnerships to advance the mission of the organization. She's also responsible for fund development and donor relations. Before joining the DHIC team, Yvette served as the campaign director for the United Arts Council of Raleigh and Wake County for 18 years, and for 5 years in programs and development at the Tammy Lynn Center that serves children and adults with developmental disabilities. Yvette is an alumna of William Peace University and North Carolina Central University's Entrepreneur Training Institute. She is a member of the Triangle Chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals and has served on several not-for-profit boards committed to community and cultural development. Yvette cares deeply about issues impacting women, children, and families. She currently serves on the Alexander Family YMCA Board of Advisors and was recently appointed to serve on the Wake County Commission for Women. Paul Kane has served as the Executive Vice President, CEO of the Home Builders Association of Raleigh-Wake County for the past 4 years. A trade association of more than 2,500 members serving Wake County's residential construction industry, HBA of Raleigh-Wake County is the second largest HBA in the nation. A native of Oklahoma, Paul attended the University of Notre Dame before earning his law degree from the University of Oklahoma. Paul was a real estate lawyer in private practice for 14 years, during which he represented the Home Builders Association of Greater Tulsa and many of its members. Paul was a member of the Tulsa HBA and served on its board of directors. For 10 years, Paul served as the Executive Vice President, CEO for the Home Builders Association of Greater Tulsa. In 2012, he was named the National Association of Home Builders Executive Officer of the Year. He has been an active member of the NAHB Executive Officers Council and served as its president in 2015. Paul is also the secretary and board member of Operation Coming Home, an effort to meet the housing needs of severely injured veterans. Paul and his wife Sabrina have 3 children and are proud to call North Carolina home. And last but not least, Pamela Wideman serves as the director of City of Charlotte's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department. In this role, she is responsible for oversight of the city's affordable housing efforts, as well as the city's divisions of code enforcement, community engagement, and immigrant integration, and CHARMEC 311. Pam has more than 20 years of experience in public policy and administration and is adept at forging creative solutions to government issues at the local level, which was highlighted through her recognition by the Charlotte Business Journal as one of the top 10 behind-the-scenes newsmakers in the Charlotte area for 2017. Pam currently serves as vice chair of the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Affordable Housing Committee, which advises and makes recommendations for policy and funding approaches to support and encourages the development of affordable housing near transit stops. An alumna of Belmont Abbey College and UNC Charlotte, Pam has completed a municipal administration program at UNC Chapel Hill's Institute of Government and the Senior Executives in State and Local Government program, an executive education program at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School. Pam strongly believes that service is the rent we pay for living on this earth, and is often asked to share her public sector and community development experiences with students, professional trade organizations, and local municipalities. We are delighted that she was able to travel to Raleigh tonight to be here. And again, we give a round of applause for our panel tonight. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to, as we chatted before, I have my set of questions, and now I have a stack of questions from the audience. But I'm going to start with mine first. Let me pull mine up. Let's see here. And Key, I'm going to start with you. And you do work and live in Southeast Raleigh. which has come up in a number of conversations and media stories on the impacts of gentrification here in Raleigh and Wake County. The neighborhood has historically been significant in the Black community, but news reports have noted that this is changing. How do you see that change happening, especially in how it relates to gentrification?
So I just want to make one correction. I work in Southeast Raleigh. I do not live in Southeast Raleigh. Just under a year ago, I purchased a house just across the line in Knightdale, which I think is a significant part of the story in terms of our ability to live in the places where we were raised or where we grew up. I spent about a year and a half or 2 years really trying to find a property, particularly in the neighborhood that I grew up in or somewhere close to it that met the needs of my family, but was also affordable to me. And offer after offer that was refused, generally be out by a cash buyer, which I would assume to be a developer. And so, after waiting for a long time, just made that move and decided to go a few inches down the road into Knightdale. So I did want to make that correction. I don't want anyone to think that I am misrepresenting my residency. And what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
How do you see the change happening, just with people, having grown up there, working there, just...
Sure. So I think for me personally, I have a very visceral reaction to the changes that I see. Looking around in this audience, and I see some of the folks who were a part of the neighborhood that I grew up in, and it's significantly different. I grew up in a space where a lot of our area's doctors, attorneys, teachers, principals, just really people who shaped my foundation as a young person, lived. Lots of them have aged or are either deceased at this point. Some of them are still around. But as I ride through the neighborhood that I call home, it looks very different today than it did before. We joke, but don't joke. Anytime you see somebody pushing a $1,000 baby stroller with 3 dogs on a leash and somebody running without a shirt on, things have changed. Y'all know it's true. And so, for me, it's a very visceral reaction to think of the traditions and the things that we held true in our neighborhood really taking a dramatic shift. I think we like to believe that we welcome new neighbors, but we would also I would like to see preservation of the culture and history and the historical significance of the folks who lived in that neighborhood and really built that neighborhood to be preserved and presented much more frequently and honored in a different way.
And of course, I understand, as I mentioned before, the challenges, so I appreciate, that clarification there. So, Asa, right?
Yes, yes, Asa.
Asa, yes. So, your mission as a realtor, and you've said this on social, and that's where I pulled this part of the question from. Your mission as a realtor to help clients build wealth through home ownership, but especially those in Black communities and other marginalized communities. In general, period, do you feel that is possible? Not just for Black communities, but just period, do you feel like that's possible?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason why that is my mission, is because I remember as a child when I grew up in the projects, and I remember at 6 years old when my mother and my father bought their first house and the excitement, that they had finally were able to do it. And so when you ask that, why are you so excited about this? It's a nice house, He says, because ownership is the key to making it here in America. And, when you own a home, you own a piece of America. And so I've always been wanting to do that. This is my second career, and I wanted to make sure that I helped as many people as I can own real estate. The preamble to I'm a realtor, right? I'm president of the Realtors, so the preamble to our code of ethics starts out with, under all is the land. So land is very, very important, especially when it comes to building wealth. The wealthiest person in the world, we would say the Queen of England, right, owns 6.6 billion acres of land. So that right there lets you know it's one of the best ways to build wealth. I love the slide that you put up there about redlining and all that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I know, when I watched a documentary, I can't remember, I think it was The Race, Power of Illusion or something like that, and it just really grabbed me because I'm trying to do this every day. I'm in the trenches, and when you look at the historical, reference and what's happened in this country when it comes to equity and the displacement of communities and blockbusting and redlining. You know, in 1934, they passed the National Housing Act, which pretty much created the Federal Housing Administration, which we know as FHA. Before then, okay, you had to pay pretty much, 50% up front to purchase a home. And so when the Federal Housing Administration started backing loans, you were able to go in with a down payment of 10, 20% and say, okay, I can now pay a very small monthly payment amount to actually live. Well, the other part of that is you're building equity as you live. So you had suburban flight, you had those areas that were green, that, they were, predominantly white, and they were building equity over the years. And of course, the redlining that happened, if there was more than 20% black, well, they didn't give those loans to those people. It was very difficult. And so you fast forward down to 1968, which is 34 years later, right? You have the Fair Housing Act, which we celebrated last year at the National Association of Realtors because it was a monumental act for us, especially, minorities, black and Latino. It was now licensed law. It was a law, really, period, that you could not do that. And so we were able to get loans and start building equity. But let's look at it. 34 years that they were building equity versus another part of the population that they weren't doing it. And so when you look at that, most of the wealth that Americans have in this country now is equity. And so my mission really is to try to make sure people understand that although there's some people that are behind, you can still buy a home, build equity as you live your normal life, and make a difference and, establish a future for generations to come.
Which is wonderful news for me. I can burn some of those slides I have, working with someone who knows what they're doing. Speaking of someone else who works with folks with both home ownership and also finding affordable housing, Yvette, your organization, you help people find affordable housing, that's correct?
Yes, in part.
In part.
Yes.
In addition, you also help the community organizations build capacity and you do education in communities to help them understand a lot of these changes like gentrification. Talk more about your work and help people in this room understand what you do and what your work does and how it's different from some of the other folks here on the stage.
Thanks, Kristen. So I do want to say a few things before I get started. First of all, you gave us a very lofty introduction, and I appreciate that. And in no way do I consider myself an expert on gentrification. There are many people out here whose faces I see, I won't call their names, who have been really raising this as an issue for our community for years and years and years. And so I am still learning like many of you. I will also say that I'm accustomed to sitting in those seats out here and not up on this stage. So I want to give a shout out to all the performing artists who are brave enough to get up here and it certainly is a different perspective from sitting up here. That said, DHIC, and if I might give a little history, was started back in 1974 under the leadership and guides of the late Mayor Clarence E. Lightner. He, at the time, along with CAC members, saw the change that was happening in neighborhoods in and around downtown Raleigh and wanted to do something about it. As mayor, he really urged the city to step up and to step out and to put resources into a program essentially to provide resources for home improvements and down payment assistance. And so that program took off and spun off essentially and started, DHIC was formed from that effort. We are a nonprofit developer of affordable housing. It was a bold move then. And I think it's fascinating that the conversation 45 years ago, here we are 45 years later, still having the same conversation about how to preserve our neighborhoods, which suggests to me that it's not an easy issue to address. I will not make the mistake to say that I know what it's like to live in a community that's rapidly gentrifying. But we do work with residents who are renters. DHIC has over 42 unique communities in our portfolio. Multifamily rental apartments for seniors, families, and supportive housing for individuals who are low to moderate income. And what we know is the stress of finding housing that's affordable to rent. So oftentimes when you talk about gentrification, you talk about it from the perspective of the homeowner. But what about the renter? What about people who live in communities that are rapidly gentrifying? They leave with nothing, right? Their rents go up, and then where do they go? And so affordable housing and rental housing is also an option in a way in which to preserve neighborhoods. People who want to downsize, people who don't want to own their home any longer but still want to remain in the community, rental still is an option for those individuals. I will say that we talk about revitalization without displacement. That seems to be an emphasis, and I think is an important point to make. I don't think when I talk to people that somehow they think that neighborhoods aren't going to change. They're going to change. Things are going to change. It's inevitable, right? But they want to be included. So they want to be part of the conversation. People who live in communities that are rapidly gentrifying should be front and center. Who better to know what should happen in their neighborhoods? And so I would encourage in a conversation as we think about solutions and strategies to go back to just grassroots outreach engagement. I just err on the side of participation. I believe having and hearing all voices. You may not like all voices that are heard. You might not even like what they're saying for that matter. But it's important that we hear all people and not just hear, but be willing to do something and respond to the needs of the community. And so how would you feel? All we have to do is think about how you would feel if you lived in the community that you lived in for as long as you lived in it, raised your family, your grandparents lived there, you raised your children, you're older now. So we talk about the millennials coming in, but what about the elderly that live in these communities that are rapidly gentrifying, that don't have the resources, that don't have the education, that don't know how to navigate the process, and quite frankly, they're being taken advantage of. And so we should really we should be incensed about that, and for those who are taking advantage of these seniors, you should be ashamed of yourself, to be quite frank about it. And I'm sorry, somebody said, Yvette, just be me and say what I'm gonna say. And I know it's a real estate transaction, I get it, you can't dictate who should buy and sell to whom, but we have a responsibility as a community to take care of our elders and our children if no one else, okay? So I will close with that, because I could probably go on and on, but, and I don't know if I was wearing the DHIC hat or just a resident of Southeast Raleigh hat, but anyway, we as an organization are committed to ensuring that people, we got our start in Southeast Raleigh, we worked in we're still continuing to work in Southeast Raleigh, just finished Washington Terrace redevelopment, phase 2 of that, over by in East Raleigh by St. Augustine's University. That really, when that property fell into foreclosure and went up for sale, DHIC raised our hand because we wanted to put a stake in the ground for affordable housing, because I could tell you when the marketing materials went out for that property and they were selling it, they were using all the cute catchphrases and buzzwords, close to downtown and walking distance, all the things that signal gentrification. And I feel like if we had not done that, and I know there was some pushback about that, but had we not done that, that could easily have been 245 affordable apartment homes lost to that community, our community. So we feel proud that we were able to do that.
Everything you just said was very important and very vital, and we can't ignore the fact we do all represent certain things here. Now, granted, I'm at an independent point, but I've been in your position where I've represented other things, and we represent each other, and I think this gets to what the core of what we're dealing with. Which, moving on with Paul, I wanted to talk to you about effectively how much does it really cost to build a house? What makes housing affordable? What, on the builder side of things, on the construction, on the design side of things, what makes it so hard in this day and time to make things quote unquote affordable?
And that's a really important question. And I'll backtrack a little bit and say the Home Builders Association is a privately funded trade association for the residential construction industry. We're not connected with any government entity. We don't take any public funds. But we're heavily involved with the process. And to understand where we are, you have to understand how we got there. Asa mentioned earlier about that we had decades of kind of suburban flight, and the suburbs thrived, and city cores tended to suffer. And about 20 years ago, many communities, including Raleigh, began kind of, let's revitalize downtown. Let's make downtown vibrant like it used to be, the walkable, alive city. And I think that was a good thing. And I think if you look at where it's come in the past 20 years, we've done that. But in the midst of that, that started bringing people back from the suburbs, finding this to be a good, cool place to be. Thrown in the middle of that was a little something they called the recession. And the recession, a lot of people don't understand that we're still feeling the impacts of that today, because what ended up happening was few industries were more impacted than the home building industry. Many home builders went out of business. Some decided to retire early. Many just had to let people go. It was a hard time, and I know everybody had a hard time then. But the demand for housing didn't stop. Just because they couldn't build as many houses doesn't mean that they weren't needed. And so during this time, there was that pent-up demand, and this was happening everywhere. And anybody who's taken a 101 economics course knows that when your demand exceeds your supply, prices go up. When the recession, well, during that time also, a lot of the regulatory bodies in Washington got very busy and started rolling out hosts of new regulations and that had a huge impact on housing. The National Association of Home Builders did a nationwide survey and determined that on average, 25% of the sale price of a new home is regulatory costs. 25%. And if you're talking multifamily, it's 30%. That has nothing to do with the sticks and bricks that make up the building. Those are just regulatory costs. So when we came out of the recession, I guess we're still coming out of the recession, there's been this struggle to try to meet this demand. People still need places to live. People are still starting their adult lives, starting their families, getting out of college, starting their jobs, whatever they're doing, and that they need places to live. And in today's environment, that the regulatory costs, they're significant. They really are. Then right now we're experiencing the biggest labor shortage probably in the history of the industry. The average age of contractors is going up. And if you think about it, averages don't really change much. As the older guys retire, the younger guys come and fill their place, and the younger guys are not coming and filling their place. And so that impacts, again, the price and how long it takes to get a house out of the ground. On top of that is we've experienced some major material price increases. Softwood lumber, which is basically 2x4s. For years, those were obtained from Canada, and a treaty that we had with Canada expired, and apparently they forgot to renew it. Throw in the midst of that, Washington decided that we needed to throw some tariffs on top of that to make it even worse. And so last year we had and this is just one product that goes into the house, but we had the highest price on softwood lumber in recorded history. And so it's a very multifaceted problem. You can't just say, gosh, builder, why don't you just build a cheaper house? I could tell you many of them would love to because they know that there is a rich market there. I think many builders would enjoy the opportunity of knowing that their house is going to sell very quickly because it has a good low price versus sitting on a house that's more expensive for days and days and having to pay that interest on their loan and everything else. So it's a very difficult struggle. Add to that, Wake County is incredibly popular. And I'm one of those people that moved here. I came here about 4 years ago. I'm one of the people that was drawn to the beauty and the coolness of Raleigh. And so I'm one of those people adding to the things here. We all hear the statistics that Wake County is growing by 60-some people every day, and they need a place to live. And so, if we're not increasing the housing stock, then what's left gets more expensive. On average, they'll say that a final home will cost, the final home price is about 20% of it is the lot cost. And it's incredibly difficult to find any lot in Wake County under $100,000. And if you do the math, that you can't build a house for $250,000 anymore. You really have to go out of the county where they're not as expensive. So I will tell you, the Home Builders Association is very aware of these numbers and these realities. And we don't like having the black eye of, all you guys can do is build expensive houses. We don't enjoy that. We want to serve everybody. We've been working with State Representative Yvonne Holly. We had 2 of our members that were part of Wake County's steering committee on affordable housing that Chair Jessica Holmes put together. Just last week, we had Wake County Administrator David Ellis and Lorena McDowell, who's heading up Wake County's affordable housing initiatives, come to the Home Builders Association and talk to us. And we were so excited to be a part of that dialogue, and we want to continue to be a part of that dialogue. I guess as a final note on that, I do have a table outside, and I've got a brochure on there that was provided to me by the National Association of Home Builders, because this is a nationwide epidemic. It is an epidemic. It's a big problem. And that brochure is full of concepts on how we can work together as a community to make that happen. It takes planning, it takes thought, it takes initiatives, it takes working together. And from planning and zoning to incentives that the city can provide. If the city can provide certain speed up permits for affordable housing, or lower some of the regulatory barriers if in fact it's going to be an affordable home, I think you'd find that the builders would be very responsive to that. And the brochure that I have outside kind of goes through some of those initiatives, but it's going to take everybody sitting at the table talking this through together and not just throwing stones at each other saying, why aren't you doing more? Because I think we all have to do more together.
And I agree completely, and I think what you've conveyed here is that, outside of the narrative that we've been getting, it's just the builders want to make homes big. There is a market, and one of the things you talked about was just the challenges that this is a nationwide problem. Of course, Pam, we have you here to talk about Charlotte and the challenges of Charlotte. Of course, when I originally wrote this question, there was one phenomenon in particular I was thinking about, but honestly, I want you to talk through some of the challenges Charlotte is facing with the gentrification you're seeing in Charlotte, specifically, predatory behaviors or positivity, or, even just how the transit environment has been different there. Just talk about Charlotte for a little bit and kind of how you've been meeting some of these challenges and facing some of these challenges around gentrification-related things.
Sure. So let me thank you. Thank you for welcoming me into the city of Raleigh. Charlotte, just as my colleague just said, Charlotte is just like every other growing, thriving city. We have affordable housing challenges, suffice it to say crises as well. Charlotte, we get about 100 new residents per day. We still have that supply and demand type thing. So affordable housing, we're working feverishly to figure out what we need to do about it. What I would say, and what I would consider us to think about, and this is going to be provocative, so I hope after I say this, you guys will invite me to come back to Raleigh. When you think about gentrification, often when we hear the term gentrification, it automatically has a negative connotation, right? In Charlotte, we talk about gentrification, but we also talk about neighborhood change, right? And so neighborhood change, gentrification, kind of one and the same, but think about it. Neighborhoods, I like to think, are the building blocks of any great city, right? We also think about neighborhoods as just infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, but I think about infrastructure also as an adequate housing supply and types of housing so that people have housing choices, right? So I think about our typical apartment, I think about our duplexes, our triplexes, and our single family homes. And I know when we start talking about that missing middle kind of housing types, housing other than single family, people get kind of upset, right? But I would challenge us to think about where we are in the world with cities growing, right? And so we're not making any new land. And so we have to get dense and we have to be accepting of that. I know that's hard. But gentrification, I believe we want our neighborhoods to change, right? I think the problem becomes when people are involuntarily displaced. And when someone said earlier, folks don't have an opportunity to be a part of the change. I, as the city's Housing and Neighborhood Services Director, I believe that you do things with people instead of to people, and so they need to be a part of the conversation. When we talk about gentrification or neighborhood change, we often leave businesses out of the conversation too, right? You have many long-term businesses who have been in neighborhoods that get kind of forced out too, if you will. So I don't necessarily think gentrification on its face is a bad thing. I think it becomes bad when people don't have an opportunity to participate, to stay, or they're involuntarily forced out, right? Some people, we talked about home ownership being wealth, right? They might decide, yes, this is my time. I'm going to sell my home and I'm going to take my chances. It's okay if people make that choice. I just encourage people, as we're talking about it and educating, make an educated decision, right? And so that's something that, whether it be City of Raleigh, Wake County, organizations like DHIC, home builders, realtors, help people make those educated decisions. In terms of how we're tackling it in Charlotte, we recently, City Council, very supportive City Council around affordable housing. We've done a couple of things. We adopted, it's called the Charlotte Housing Framework, and it's kind of our strategy of how we will invest affordable housing dollars in order to combat gentrification. That strategy is built on 3 pillars. We know we're not going to build our way out of this issue, right? And so we have to preserve our neighborhoods. So it's built on building new construction, preservation, and then family self-sufficiency initiatives, right? We know that everyone deserves a safe, decent place to call home, whether that be you own it or whether that be you're renting it. But how do you hold on to that once you get it? And so how do you upskill or better educate yourself? So City Council, we've had a housing bond since 2001. Most recently, the City Council passed a $50 million, City Council and the voters passed a $50 million of housing trust fund bond. What that fund does is it allows the city to provide gap subsidy to developers to help finance housing in such a way that it continues to be affordable over a long term. We also are doing things like down payment assistance programs. Most recently, what we recognize as was previously said, the cost of housing is what it is, right? And so we've increased the amount of our down payment assistance program to help people be able to purchase in areas more affluent areas and really purchase in a way that mirrors the actual home ownership cost. We have a program with partner with the Foundation for the Carolinas, where we have a $20 million endowment where we're helping people with a short-term rental assistance. So there are no silver bullets. What I would say, though, the city in Charlotte can't do it alone. The city of Raleigh won't be able to do it alone. So it takes those public-private partnerships. I like to say it's a community issue that's going to require community solutions. We're looking at, we do expedited permitting that was previously mentioned to really help home builders who are building an affordable product, really help them through the permitting process. So Charlotte certainly does not have all of the answers. We're learning as we go as well, but we're trying to tackle it from in a multifaceted way, from a number of ways and with a number of partners.
Which all these things sound great. You know, you're taking a lot of proactive approaches. Obviously, as many folks have seen, there's been a lot of changes in Charlotte. And just, again, we're here tonight to talk about some of that change and how that change can be positive. I've got a few more questions for my panel that I've prepared. I've got some questions in my lap. I know we're right around 7:36. Some of you all have answered some of the questions I had for my second round in this first round, which is excellent. I'm glad. The whole point of tonight is to educate this crowd here. But it was something I am going to go through. I may not go in order this time, but definitely there are a few more questions I want to make sure I ask, and then I'm going to get to the stack that I have in my lap here. Kia, we were both on the State of Things yesterday, and I got a chance to listen to your segment, and there was something in that segment about how a lot of the work you're doing with Southeast Raleigh Promise, you're constantly having to battle people saying that some of that work, you know, working with the Y, creating an elementary school, some of these things are gentrification, and even though they don't have anything to do with housing, but they're neighborhood change. Talk again about how you push back against making positive neighborhood changes and how that's seen as positive, not negative.
Sure, and Yvette made the point earlier to use the term that we often use at Southeast Raleigh Promise, which is revitalization without displacement. So, we recognize that gentrification, neighborhood change, whatever you want to call it, had been happening years before the site on 1436 Rock Quarry Road was ever purchased or any of that work ever began. But what we hope is that we are able to preserve affordability in using various strategies, including, the emerging Raleigh Area Land Trust, including partnerships with existing affordable housing organizations like DHIC, like Habitat for Humanity. How can we think of ways to do things differently, and then also ways to combine funding opportunities, but then also what's utterly important is land acquisition and the ability to actually preserve space today. We're behind the 8 ball on that, and so if we don't get moving now, we're not going to have an opportunity later. Those are some of the things that we're doing. I think it's really important to think about, again, this concept of neighborhood improvement. I think we all want our community to change with the changing times and to reflect our needs and our wants, whatever that might be. It's critical that we do that work together and we really reimagine our communities together while honoring the legacy of our community at the same time.
And with that, Asa, I'm going to ask you, from the perspective of a realtor and coming at this from someone who's either saved up a down payment or has it in a traditional way, how do you help that person do the things like capturing wealth in their community and capturing the homes? How do you help people get through this process? Just kind of reiterate more of what you do with helping people who are in a position, who've educated themselves, who have money coming in to do some of that.
Yeah, so when you're talking with, so the first thing I do when I get someone into my office, especially if they're young, is I say, don't buy your dream house first, right? There's two, thoughts, right? Process of thoughts here. So you have, I get out of college, right? My parents give me 20% down. I already have a head start, 20%. I stay in that home for 7 to 10 years, right? And then, I move. And then once, I'm moving the equity into the next house. You do that 3 to 5 times, throughout your life. Your kids get into first grade, high school, college, When your kids are in college, you're about to get out of college, you are now in a 7, 8, or depending on what area you are in the country, $100,000 house, you may owe like 2 or 3 on. So you're building money. You have that money, you have your pension, you have all of your, from your life of living, and then you're able to, when your kids get out of college, go, congratulations, here's your down payment on your home. So it's cyclical, right? And then you have another segment of the population I would call unaware, just not educated on it. And so they buy, now let's be honest, traditionally they buy one house. They stay in that house for 30 years. They take seconds, sometimes thirds, just trying to stay up on their bills, put their kids through college. And then when they get old, they've lived there for years. Their kids are somewhere else. I don't want to live there. That's my parents' house. I grew up there. It's old. We have sliding floors now, Nest thermostats, right? And so when an investor comes and we're living somewhere else, we're like, I don't want that. I don't want to pay the taxes on it. My mother's gone now. What do you want to give me for it? Here, have it. And so that's what you've been seeing around the country in these areas. So I think the first thing is to educate them. Find out really what your house is worth. Of course, me being a realtor, I'm going to say, use a realtor, right? Find out what's going on 2 to 3 miles around your house. Don't sell your home. There is another thought process, right? Where you go through your entire family before you actually put it on the open market. Then there's the other side, right? That says, I've got to sell this house. It's immediately on the market to whoever wants to buy it. So that type of stuff where you can preserve the home ownership. You ask a wealthy person, what's more important, right? Is it making more money, making as much money as you can, or preserving the money that you have? They're going to tell you it's capital preservation. I may not make as much money, but I don't want to lose what I already have. Well, we need to think that same way about home equity in your home. You say, I want to preserve my neighborhood. I want to preserve my home. I don't care what I could possibly do or what this person is bringing me where I can make quick money like that. I'm going to actually work to preserve my neighborhood and leave, a legacy leave something, will it to your generation, to your future generations.
And Yvette, you handed me a flyer where you talk about educating folks on that process. A lot of the folks who are getting those notices, pressure to sell their homes, or just, they haven't even gotten a piece of paper, but they feel that pressure to sell their homes. And what are you doing in addition to the flyer and things of that nature? Talk more about what you're doing to help people manage that decision from your perspective as someone in the more nonprofit space.
Thank you. So my first round of questions, I kind of aired my grievances about the rental space. And so, and I didn't mention, which I'll do now, that DHIC also has DHIC Homeownership Center, where our qualified, certified advisors, that's a little plug for them, get out and they work with individuals who are interested in first improving their financial status, like learning and better knowing how to manage your credit and your finances and the like. And then if they're interested in going on to purchase their own home, then our advisors also help them navigate that process. Particularly giving them or showing them how to access the down payment assistance programs. And the city offers programs, the state offers programs. And so you can, if someone's coming in and trying to buy a home in a given community, they can get upwards, and it sounds like a lot, $60,000, $50,000 to $60,000 in down payment assistance if they qualify. The challenge is that for a moderate income household, that's almost not enough nowadays because home prices have escalated so much. So whereby, people that we might serve can afford a home price for $180,000. Well, home sales are what, 80, 180 and north of that now. And so they can't stay and remain in the communities. And so what you're finding is that people are deciding to move outside of the city limits and even outside of the county in some instances, just so they can achieve home ownership. And so we were approached recently, last year I believe it was, by a local community organization, and they wanted to know what and who they can contact in their engagement with the community, the concern about this predatory practices with our seniors who are homeowners in communities in and around downtown Raleigh. And that they were getting all these postcards in the mail, like we'll buy your home, and you know the story. And people are concerned about that because essentially what happens is that the seniors, they're offered a lump sum amount that they've never seen before in their life. So that's enticing to anyone, A. But when you make that offer that home is probably worth, or at least it's not so much the home itself, but it's the land, is worth far more. And what this organization wanted to do was figure out how we can better educate particularly our senior homeowners and make sure that they are making informed decisions. So we pulled together some partners in the community, Legal Aid, the City of Raleigh is a partner, the Crosby Advocacy Group, they're the ones that actually spearheaded this effort, and a couple of others. And we decided to put together a flyer, and the flyer's out on our information table in the back. And so we can get this information out to the seniors, say, hold on, if you get this kind of solicitation in the mail, here are some things you need to think about, okay? Where are you gonna live once you sell your home? Can you go buy a home or find another place to, reestablish yourself? How is this gonna, impact your benefits or what have you? And are you getting a fair price? So DHIC is the main point of contact that they can call us, and then we will direct them to other services. So we're not staring or telling them what their home prices are, because we do believe that's the role of a realtor to do. But here's what I will say, because again, I err on the side of engagement and participation. Because there lack trust between the community and those who are providing the resources, the seniors are not likely going to receive the information, because if you get it as a flyer on your door or just, in the mail, you're going to take that and discard it. I think we really do have to go back to just grassroots outreach where we're knocking on doors and we're forming those relationships, because once we do that and that information can flow more freely, and seniors and their heirs and their children, whoever their next of kin might be, will be better receiving of that information. And because there are a lot of resources out there, even home improvements, but if you're not trusting of the resource or the person that has the resource, you're not going to take advantage of it, because the assumption is that the city or someone else wants my property. So I'm not going to enter into this home improvement agreement because I don't want to lose my home down the road. So I think that we are just trying to figure out a way that we can do more in outreach and partner with other organizations that share the same mission.
Which is excellent information. I think it's vital that we have that education out there. You know, when I think about this, you know, obviously, even when putting this presentation together, I was able to do that because I know that there's hope out there and there are solutions out there. We don't have to just stay where we are, where we're in a crisis situation. There are things that can be done before, during, and after some of the issues we've talked about on stage tonight. And even there's preventative things, you know, the building of wealth, the education, and that can happen no matter who you are and what community you're in. And the folks who are on the stage you all are doing that in all your special ways. So I appreciate you for doing that. Paul, I wanted to talk to you, something that one of the first things I noticed, or one of the first terms I heard about changes in housing was right after I got out of undergrad when I was living here. And even during undergrad, I would see things in the News Observer about something we would call teardowns, effectively, especially inside the Beltway, because a lot of us value being close to certain things. Of course, North Hills had just opened, you know, Crabtree had gone under another renovation, the early stages of downtown revitalization in that 2004 to 2007 period. Talk about just that effect that it's had over the past few years. Is there a way, can a housing style, can a house that's 2 stories taller than what's around the neighborhood really signify any of these phenomena, gentrification or anything of that nature?
Tear downs and make mansions. I always get the easy questions. You know, when you're talking about infill development, and that's what you call development in an existing neighborhood, you know, versus greenfield development, you know, the suburban huge tracts of land. There's really one of 2 ways that comes about. You either have someone who has purchased that property and wants to make it their own, fix it up, do whatever they want with it, or a builder has purchased it in hopes that they can fix it up and resell it. So in either instance, when you're talking about buying an existing home, first off, if a individual has purchased it, it's entirely up to them, and that's where it's going. But a lot of times, most often, and I'm not going to say always, but most often, when a home is torn down, it's because the cost of rehabilitation exceeds what a new home would cost. As was mentioned earlier, sometimes the lot is worth more than the house. And when you get instances like where Asa was talking about, where someone moves into a house and lives there for 30 years and never, well, you get a lot of deferred maintenance. You may have, you know, gutters hanging off the roof and everything else. Another problem that comes that often necessitates a tear down is that building codes are significantly different today than they were 30 years ago. Heck, they're different than they were 10 years ago. And, you know, many would argue that modern day codes are a good thing. Homes are tighter, safer, stronger, can withstand, they've got resistance to a lot of the weather impacts we have that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so you may get into a situation where if you're going to do enough work on this house to deal with all the deferred maintenance, the local code officials may say, well, if you're going to touch that part, you have to bring everything up to code. If you're going to touch a certain percentage of the electrical components, you have to bring the entire house electrical system up to code. And so you're saying, well, that was only a $150,000 house. Shouldn't I be able to fix it up for $20,000? Well, maybe not. And because when you're starting to talk about having to bring all those things, maybe a 1950 house up to 2019 building codes, that's significant. And so that's where the decision has to be made. If you're talking about a house that was abandoned and has plywood over the windows, that's an easy decision. But it gets more difficult, more emotional when you're talking about the home Asa mentioned that was somebody's family home for 30 years, that it's not just a structure, it's not just a house, it is a home. And so you get into a very emotional component there. So, you know, that's the tear down side of it. I think certainly if you've got an individual that's purchased that property, that decision is not made lightly by any means. Then on the, why do people build ugly houses today? And I'm not going to defend that, okay? I'm sorry if there's an ugly house near you. But again, if we're talking about where I went in and purchased that property, and I say, builder, this is what I want on that property, and the builder's going to say, okay. And your taste and my taste may vary differently. But, and I think for the most part, you bought that property, as long as you're complying with building codes and zoning codes, you should be able to do what you want. Probably the more problematic kind comes when you're talking about a builder that buys the lot, doesn't have a customer in mind yet, and is trying to build the home for the purpose of sale. Building styles have changed dramatically over the years. There's much more open style floor plans. People want modern amenities. They want, certainly in a new home, they want the best that they can afford of what's to be offered today. Mm-hmm. So what may end up being built may look very different than what's around it. And I know that that's probably, quite frankly, one of the biggest sore points of infill development. Some of the more mindful builders will really make an effort to try to make it blend in, but not all do. And that's a struggle. But ultimately, with that, if that builder is building a house for sale, they have to make sure that it will sell. And most of the builders who've been in the business for a while know exactly what home buying buyers today want and are willing to pay for. And when you get into tastes and styles, it can create some riffles.
A lot of good answers on just, I think one of the, at least for me, that was one of the first things when I was exploring this. Now, of course, this is something I've been fascinated with, just how cities work, but as in the context of Raleigh, why is this happening? How is this, the pressures, all of those things. Getting down to sort of my last prepared question, Pam, you've talked about a lot of the things you're doing in Charlotte. What do you challenge cities to do, especially in the realm of policy, around ensuring that gentrification is, revitalization without displacement, it's, the neighborhood changes, all these things we've talked about tonight. What are some things that not just Raleigh, Charlotte, we can continue to do on the policy level to help folks?
Sure, great question. And I want to make sure I'm connecting the dots. So your first question was kind of tell us about Charlotte, tell us what Charlotte is doing. And people often ask, like, what do you do to mitigate gentrification,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And so one of the ways you mitigate gentrification is you have an adequate supply of affordable housing in different housing types. So I just wanted to make sure people connected that, right? But from a policy perspective, I think certainly to the extent where one of the policies that we just approved, or City Council just approved in the city of Charlotte, was a land disposition policy, right? And so again, we're never going to have enough money to build our way out of this issue, but how might cities consider, and this is a best practice that's done across the country, is utilizing publicly owned land to further affordable housing, right? So we passed a land disposition policy. And in short, really what that policy says we'll do is that we will look at how we are disposing of city-owned land, and that one of the things that we consider in terms of disposing of that is if that land can be used for affordable housing, we consider that before we just sell it for whatever. Also, just really looking at our land inventory, right, to decide of the publicly owned land, which is best suited for affordable housing. Cities have lots of land, but all of that land isn't conducive for affordable housing. So land disposition policy. Also from a policy side, again, the notion of expedited permitting, right, where there's going to be true affordable housing there. And you hear me, I keep saying true affordable. We've looked at it in a way, we don't want folks just coming in and saying, hey, this is going to be an affordable housing development. Well, is it affordable to just the first person who's there? Will there be some long-term deed restrictions? What percentage? Some cities across the country, they have looked at what's called overlays, different overlays, and so their arguments, depending on where you are legally, about can you have overlay districts in certain parts of town. Now, that's not to say that's a mandatory inclusionary policy, because we know that that's a non-starter here in North Carolina, but just really setting the expectation is as you go through rezonings, just asking the questions, is a portion of this going to be is it going to be affordable? So really helping understand that. We look at locational guidelines as we're allocating housing trust fund dollars. So, there are certain parts of towns along our transit lines where we do want to incent the development of affordable housing. So those are some of the things. So from a regulatory, a land development perspective, and then just making sure that we're utilizing our dollars, that we have policies to support when we're awarding local or federal dollars for affordable housing.
Again, that is vital. It is. I think it's great that Charlotte is being proactive. We're here in Raleigh being proactive. All these cities that are being proactive about a lot of the changes that are continuing. And I appreciate, again, this isn't something that you are just sleeping on. It may seem like it may seem like nothing is happening, but a lot of these kinds of changes aren't overnight changes. Just like, honestly, what we're looking at with the changes that are coming in weren't overnight. These things have been going on. These things get hotter over time. And of course, as someone who's been experiencing some of these things personally, in our personal purview, yeah, it is hot. But I think the thing we can do is do our best to educate ourselves and be able to thrive from that. I do just have time for one audience question, and what the one that I really was compelled to ask is, how do we talk about the business community and businesses? How the question as it's written is, what can stakeholders, especially the city, citizens, and business community, do to encourage diversity of business ownership and newly built and renovated shopping centers in the gentrifying neighborhoods? Anyone can take on that question or parts of that question. Next question. Okay. So another question I have here is, I have another question that's asking specifically about a couple hot button issues, both the soccer stadium and how transit, how can be ready for those things to, how are those things going to affect affordable housing? How do we maintain a degree of affordability when faced with new things, new shiny things like new transit, like the soccer stadiums?
Yeah. So I'll speak to the transit. Charlotte, we learned lessons from this, and so we're building on those lessons. One of the things, when you announce a transit line, right, we know the price of land goes up, right? And so to the extent that a city can be proactive in not only acquiring enough land to build out the transit amenity, but also acquiring land, again, I said to the extent possible because I know this costs, acquiring or preserving any city-owned assets in and around that transit area, that's a really, really smart thing to do.
I appreciate that answer. And then my last question that I have here, I think I'm glad this question was asked. I'm glad this person did actually name themselves in this question. A gentleman named Ethan has asked, is there a way for a middle-class white family to move downtown without contributing to the problem? I'm assuming the problem, talking about the racialized version of the problem here. And I appreciate your courage with putting your name on this question. Anyone want to take on that one? I do want to honor the fact that it is in my lap.
I mean, I don't know that I have like the answer for that, but I think yes, and I think the first part of that answer is the spirit in which you come into the neighborhood, right? So I've had the experience of having lots of really great conversation with very liberal, lovely white people, but then signing on to Nextdoor and seeing comments like, this guy keeps walking in front of my house. Well, this guy lived here long before you got here. And so the attitude that you bring with that home purchase and that decision to come into our community, I think is really key. If you really want to be engaged with the existing community, not throw it away and create your own, then I think it's easier to be received. So yeah, you can do it, but you've got to have the right spirit when you approach that decision.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's equitable resources, right? So when you come, usually when there's inbound migration like that, like say urban migration, the resources come with them. The tax base is generated, it's revitalized, right? And so it's having access and equitable access to those resources. What I said earlier about that 34-year gap in the building of equity, I think as a country, they said this in that documentary, we've missed the boat. Because just imagine if everything was equitable, how much more wealth and how much, because when there's the same economic base, the same educational foundation, there's no issue like this. We can live in homogeneous communities and there's no issue. It's only when the resources, are not equitable that there's an issue. And so I feel like, the way to do that, is to make the playing field equal.
And with that, everyone here on this panel tonight, you've brought wonderful answers, insight, valuable information here. I do want to challenge everyone, of course, it's Raleigh-based. Again, we have tables out here. They have brought information for you. Continue to talk, continue to work together, continue to push through this. My solutions, the solutions to everyone on this panel has had are not going to be the same. I do want to thank everyone on the panel for coming here tonight, and thank the City of Raleigh for having me here tonight. I'm going to bring the Mayor Pro Tem back on the stage to wrap us up for tonight. I think we're going to exit the stage.
So.
But I just want to say, if you want to have a real conversation, and Yvette spoke about having community engagement, I think that in the future you should be okay with having community engagement here and allowing questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are often silent, and the fact that we're not allowed to ask questions is part of the problem.
Thank you. Thank you for that input. One thing I do want to say, I know myself, Councilman Mandel, and Councilman Crowder, we have district meetings that we open it up for that as well within the district specifically. So that information is also listed on our website, city website. So there's some opportunities, but I'm actually going to, panel, don't leave yet, because what I actually want to do is get to a couple of questions. I know we're past time, but as Mayor Pro Tem, I'm going to step in and ask some questions that were asked. One of the questions is, which cities do you think are doing a good job addressing issues of equity and gentrification? Now, I will say I know Minnesota is doing some things. I just had a conversation with an individual today about 11th Street in DC, looking at a particular area. And I just received that information today, so I'm looking to get some more information. But is there any of the panelists have anything?
Charlotte, we're learning a lot, right? And I don't know if you guys keep up with Charlotte news. There's a Leading on Opportunity group. And that group came as a result. There was a study done by Raj Chetty, who's a professor from UC Berkeley, and he's at Harvard now. But anyway, Charlotte ranked 50 out of 50 large cities. If you were born in Charlotte poor, according to that study, you were likely going to die poor. And so we didn't like that. The community, the business community, no one liked that. And so a group of business leaders and civic leaders worked together there over about an 18-month, developed what's called our Leading on Opportunity report. Lots of findings. You can Google leadingonopportunity.org, read the report, great report. A lot of findings came out of that report. One of the findings was, city, if we're going to overcome that, family stability, affordable housing, the need for affordable housing was one of of those things. That work led to our $50 million bond, trust fund bond. I'm proud to say that our city council just approved another $50 million that will be on the ballot in November. And so we hope our voters will approve that again. They didn't just stop there. The study also looks at early education, right? We know that what happens to you by third grade determines a lot of what's going to happen to you in the rest of your life. So the county has really embraced work around that as well. Housing was often thought of as just a city issue, but this year in the county manager's budget, she put some dollars in there to help advance affordable housing. One of the other things that the city is doing is, again, this notion of upskilling, helping people with jobs. We have a program, it's called Project Peace, and it's where we're working with folks who are hard to employ, but really having the private sector step in and help them obtain jobs. So those are just some of the things. Again, Charlotte has not totally got this right. We're learning, but we are making strides through kind of looking at our programs, more affordable housing, and really looking at that early education piece.
Okay. One more person that may want to address that?
So someone sent me an article about Minneapolis and what they're doing. It's just a very interesting article. They are getting rid of single-family home zoning. And I thought that was something that they're doing. And in reading the article, one of the things they mentioned was that it's very important, and especially as a realtor, it's very important to, address land in the highest and best use. And so in Minneapolis, where you have 75% of the homeowners are white and 25% are black, there's just not that, wealth there in order to even, they had to try something. And so what they did is they said, we're going to go in, we're going to get rid of single-family home zoning and go to more multifamily where we can have multiple people living on the same tract of land. And that's how they are approaching creating a more homogeneous society and affordable housing. So I thought that was very interesting.
All right. Thank you. I have two more I'm going to try to get to. How can urban revitalization occur without gentrification?
So I'll take a quick jab at this one. So again, I think it goes back to the beginning of Kristen's presentation about how the definition of gentrification. So I think revitalization or improvement can happen without displacement when we have intentional strategies behind preserving affordability and building equity. I think it's most often successful when you can employ those strategies on the front end rather than trying to back into them on the back end. So yeah, the short answer is yes, I think it's possible. And thanks for that question, because that allowed me to say something I want to say about the last one, which was in Louisville, Kentucky. They're doing some really amazing work around building equity all around the city. And so they don't have a housing issue in the same way that we have, but they do have an equity issue, just like all of our cities across the country do. And so thinking about ways to not think of race equity as something to talk about or think about, but thinking about tools and how we operationalize it, what sorts of programs and investments do we make, how do we honor organizations and companies that are run by people of color, and make sure that we're giving the adequate amount of capacity so that impact can be greater. So those are just some things to think about. Google Kentucky, not the Derby, but the work they're doing when you get home.
Yes.
And so I would like to prick our consciousness a little bit, because it really depends upon how far we're willing to go as a community and how much we're willing to invest to achieve equitable neighborhoods. Because every neighborhood needs something different. Some neighborhoods need more than other neighborhoods. And if we're willing collectively as a community to invest in these neighborhoods to ensure that people are not displaced, I think that's the question. There's no shortage of answers or great solutions. Are we willing? I think is the question that we have to ask ourselves. And so I will say that in building, I go back to relationships, because it really is about having candid conversations, to your point. and be willing to have that dialogue. And once we get to that solution or a community benefits agreement, I think someone mentioned that earlier before the panel started, that if we have an agreement that we're going to do this thing together, right, and that we're going to put in whatever we got to put in to make sure everybody sees themselves as part of this process, I think that's winning, in my opinion.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I would say we as communities, we can't be afraid of density when we talk about urban revitalization, right? So you have to go up often because, again, there's no more land, but you have to be able to build mixed income housing types in a dense way, and as a community, be okay with that.
Okay. So that leads to my last question I have here is, how can changes in zoning improve access to housing? Anybody want to touch that? Okay.
No, I'll touch. So again, he just started, Minneapolis,
Right.
They eliminated this notion of single family, right? So again, that begins to change some of the mindset. We often think anything but single family
Right.
is bad, right? Another improvement, again, not trying to be repetitive, but is there a way to expedite or improve the rezoning process? I don't know about here, but often it takes 3 to 4 months to get something rezoned. Time is money for the building community. Are there concierges that you guys could have in terms of somebody, if you're doing an affordable component to your development, to really shepherd that through the land development and the rezoning process?
And I might add on that as well. The density is a really important thing. As we've talked about, this is a growing county. People are coming in, they need places to live, and obviously there's just a finite amount of dirt. And there's a push and pull, and the push and pull is to preserve the character of what we've got on the one hand, but yet to make more room for people on the other hand. And there's no easy way to do both at the same time. In fact, it's mind-bogglingly difficult to do both at the same time. One of the struggles we have in Raleigh, for example, is we have 19 different conservation overlay districts in Raleigh that do not allow for that density to really be a part of Raleigh's discussion in evaluating growth and how do we get more people here and make it more affordable. We've got to have the product, but if we've got huge parts of town, and most of them are in the Beltline, that have said, we're off limits from this discussion, that pushes people into the parts of town that maybe aren't ready for it yet. So again, I think we need to go back to this discussion of working together as a community and having a plan and not allowing parts of town to exempt themselves from what all of us are going through.
So thank you, Ms. Jeffers, and thank you to the panel for just providing, for volunteering to be part of the conversation and sharing your expertise. And I want to thank you all as well for coming out here tonight. This is not the end of this conversation, of us trying to find solutions. This is just the beginning. And I will personally stand up here and say before you, if you want to have a conversation and organize a meeting to really have this, let me know. We will work and have that, because you heard it here. It takes all of us together to find solutions, to deal with growth, and to deal with people that have a home. I'm gonna give this one example. I have a resident right now, and I'm gonna close on this. He just sold his house because he wants to downsize. And he's a senior. And he's having a hard time finding a place right now. They didn't say it, but I know DHIC has a waiting list of almost 8,000 residents. The Raleigh Housing Authority has a waiting list of thousands of residents. We have to find a way together as a community to look at ways to build and to grow. And tonight, we're just getting started. Thank you, God bless, and good night.